Hi there. I have a question for you to think about. Do you know what's the cost of not having a strong rhythm in your organization for your IT PMO? So, as you know, this month we're breaking down the IT PMO hierarchy. Last week we covered the program management MRC. Now, today I'm going to take a click up to the CIO CISO PMO reviews as well as the IT segment PMO reviews, where GMs of the IT organizations they typically engage with their senior directors. However, first, I'm going to talk a little bit more around the human side of things, like with regards to rhythm and accountability, which is intended to help you think about that question I just asked. Make it clear why cadence from IT leaders truly matters. So let's get started. You'll regularly hear me talk about cadence. Yes, I could jump into the obvious point. IT leaders and their PMOs should regularly have reviews, but I wanted to take a moment on the why. So, first, let's talk about how rhythm builds trust and predictability. When people in the organization know there's a regular cadence, people feel kind of a sense of stability. Nobody really wants to get that message, hey, their manager, GM, CIO, they want an update on something on the fly. And let's face it, that happens all the time. But it's just less stress for people to know that there's a rhythm they should follow and know that with that, leaders are going to be confident in the status of their program. And from a leader's perspective, there's peace in knowing that they're not likely going to get, a surprise escalation. And that predictability, it builds trust across the organization. You know, Second, let's talk about ownership and integrity. Cadence, it drives accountability. So when people know they'll be asked to reflect on progress regularly, they just show up differently. So as a quick example, I'm thinking back, many years ago to this major transformation I was engaged on back, in a very different role, but technical, but also in the supply chain world. I worked, with a program lead, super sharp guy. He's, always juggling a million things, and initially we didn't have, a review rhythm, updates, they were last minute and he always seemed to be a bit reactive, almost like kind of a bit defensive of the work. And I remember my team, being annoyed with him, admittedly annoyed. They were also admittedly annoyed with the management and frustrated with the disruptions, on how things were ran. So we made some adjustments to help. Once we got the leaders engaged on simple cadence, he just started showing up differently, less erratic. I remember him, being less stressed, which then translated to less stress for my development team. It was just knowing, what they were wanting to know ahead of time for the most part made all the difference. So I remember him thanking, me, for helping him with that change, for how things were ran, telling me how he used to just dread, giving updates, but somehow just knowing that we were going to just roll things up mid-month for leaders on a cadence, he could just more easily, get what he wanted from the program team. And I interpreted that, as that this cadence, it actually gave him some ownership and authority as a PM. So to me, that's really the shift. Cadence isn't just about discipline. It creates that space for ownership, that space for PMs, especially that to get that leadership and authority that they need in the organization. So now the last piece about how cadence really helps leaders, become more, emotionally intelligent. And I don't want to overuse that word, but let's face it, we as leaders, we get busy. It's easy to say, hey, let's just send an email or, hey, make sure, you just check in with me personally if something goes wrong. But what message is that sending your organization if you're not really present, you're not really visible? So you can't underestimate the value of having a review for connection, enabling people to not only see you personally and share those risks, but share their wins and feel like, hey, they're part of something bigger. So, leaders, need and thrive on visibility. That cadence of the PMO really offer that opportunity for them. So to conclude here, again, rhythm, cadence, it's not just an important leadership practice. It, really drives that trust and ownership in the organization. And, managing a PMO with cadence isn't just about a structure to help you oversee programs. It helps your leaders, it helps your PMs be more empowered. So now that we've talked through the human side of things, let's shift back to structure, the layers of the PMO hierarchy. Again, last round we talked around the program MRC. Today we're talking more around the CIO CISO level as well as the segment PMO reviews. So the purpose of these reviews is to give our CIO CISO along with CIO staff, a clear kind of executive view of top programs. What matters most? So what gets covered? Top programs. Typically it's the investments that drive the corporate strategy directly, the programs with big investments, the programs that have significant visible risk. Cross-org dependencies, is there friction perhaps between segments and IT or with the business for key initiatives? That should be surfaced, discussed. enterprise KPIs, and really, what I mean though is just getting a picture of how are we achieving the outcomes, or perhaps not, and needing to address that. So the reviews, they're anchored on, key three areas around strategic alignment. Are we focused on the right things? Enterprise risk. Are we surfacing, issues early enough to act? And, value realization. Are we delivering measurable business impact? So if you're wondering, what, might be in the back of the mind for CIOs in these sessions, they'll be thinking about, hey, are we delivering the enterprise value? What we committed to? Are our risks and escalations being surfaced early? And of course, they'd expect mitigation plans in place. And are we aligned with the strategic priorities? So if the CIO sees us showcasing things, for example, that isn't clearly aligned with strategy, or it's a bolt on, he or she might very well push back on why this investment is even taking place. So let's shift gears. We're going to talk about the segment PMO reviews. These are the rhythm checks that happen within each IT segment. Here we're making sure we're delivering on what the segment actually committed to. They cover the overall the key segment initiatives, not just the ones that were visible to the CIO CISO with enterprise visibility. These are the ones that pertain to the segment commitments. They cover risk, of course. GMs want updates on risks impacting their segment, whether it's the impact, the mitigation, who's owning it, what's the timeline for the targets that they need to hit to address those risks. And a big thing here, GMs want to be clear on the risks that may impact their horizontal partners that they own. And lastly is around resources. What's needed? How can they help? Regarding focus, segment PMO reviews have a tighter rein again on those segment priorities. Execution discipline, delivery health. Are we tracking progress? Are we surfacing issues? And again, a GM and staff, they should together really be thinking about celebrating the wins in their organization. Hey, make sure the recognitions take place. These reviews aren't just about the negative things. Sometimes you come in and you bring in the spotlights, which is awesome. So if you're supporting a segment, though, here's what I think is top of mind for GMs. Are we delivering against our segment goals? And of course, the GM's going to be wanting to confirm their org's commitment to the corporate goals as well. Where do we need help? Resources, decisions? Is there cross-org support we need to do? And the big thing is, are we keeping our partners informed? No surprises. Let's face it, they don't want their peers to be surprised. That'll come back to them. So segment reviews is where a GM, their staff really makes themselves visible, and they can reinforce, the segment goals, direction, and the right culture on trust and risk management in the organization. So whether we're in a segment PMO review or an executive CIO level review, there's a consistent mindset we want, leaders to bring to the table, sharing the questions here that leaders should generally keep in mind. Again, it's not just about track and progress. So again, are we aligned with strategy, delivering measurable value, building the right capabilities for the long term? We need to stay on top of where risks are emerging, what's block in progress. Security and compliance, they're part of the conversation too, especially as programs evolve. Are we introducing new risks? Are we embedding security early, not just bolting on later? And of course, most programs depend on cross-orgs coming together. We need to be clear on, where our cross-org support is needed, how we're engaging partners, and whether we're keeping everyone informed. No surprises. Last call out, what's new? Should we keep in the back of the mind, how are we leveraging innovation? Whether it's, process improvement, automation, AI, delivering smarter and faster. All right, so I'm going to wrap up with this challenge. Don't treat reviews as routine. Use them to tune your organizations. Help lead by enforcing the clarity that's needed, surface what matters, help your teams connect to strategy. When you have rhythm and it's consistent, you as a leader and what you expect from your org will become more visible, and the impact and how well your team delivers becomes more repeatable. Thank you. Looking forward to a path forward with you.